Buckle in, boys. We got some juicy info to go over. So according to an article on mpfirst.com, they have acquired some very interesting information about Fromsoftware's next new game. And yes, it's something other than the Duskbloods. So let's get into this article and I'll explain everything we know so far. So the first section of this article says this. According to the information we've been able to obtain, the Japanese studio Fromsoftware, in addition to working on updates and DLC for Elden Ring Night Reign, as well as on an exclusive title for the Nintendo Switch 2 called The Duskbloods, is also in the advanced stages of production on another as yet unannounced project, a multi-platform game with the codename FMC. Note that this is most likely an abbreviation for a longer code name. Now, the code name given to this project is very important to what we're going to go over, so keep that in mind, FMC. Also, right underneath this section, they also say that this project is so far in the advanced stages that we could be playing it as early as next year, which is crazy if you think about it. We got Night Reign this year, the Duskbloods is coming next year, and potentially we have yet another game coming alongside that one, which might seem like it's too good to be true or there's no way that they could output that many games, but we do know that they have at least 20 different games in development at Fromsoftware. Now, those are not all Souls or Souls-like titles. They span across multiple genres, but of the 20, several of them could be Souls games. But let's get back to the code names, because this is going to lead into what this next game could potentially be. So a little further down in the article, they have a list of the code names that other Fromsoftware projects have gone by during their development process. So let me just read these off to you real fast. Dark Souls 2 was FRPG 2. Dark Souls 3 was FDP. Dark Souls Remastered was FHD. Sekiro was NTCG and NTC. Bloodborne was SPRJ. Elden Ring was GR. Armored Core 6 was FNR, and Elden Ring Night Reign was CL. So why does all this alphabet soup make a difference? Well, it's very interesting when you look at the common themes in the code names. The only ones in the entire list that start with F are either Dark Souls games or an Armored Core game. Now, before we get too far into that, we need to cover why this isn't just a DLC of some kind. And the reason is that Fromsoftware DLCs typically go by the same code name as the base game of whatever game that DLC is for. So it is highly unlikely that this is just a DLC for an already existing game. It seems that we are looking at either a remake, remaster, or a completely new entry. But we also need to talk about why this isn't just the Duskbloods. How do we know that in the first place? Well, the author of the article answers that like this. Why do I assume the Duskbloods isn't FMC, despite not knowing its code name? Mainly because FMC is a project being tested and prepared for simultaneous release on multiple platforms, though I am not sure exactly how many. Meanwhile, the Duskbloods is a Switch 2 exclusive, and knowing Nintendo, it likely won't reach other platforms for years, if at all. So if it's not a DLC and it's not the Duskbloods, then what is it? So let's go over some possible contenders for what this game might turn out to be. So the first option is obviously another entry in the Armored Core series. And you might think that this is way too quick for them to pump out another one, since Armored Core 6 came out just 2 years ago. But Fromsoftware has sort of a history with Armored Core of pumping out kind of spin-off games with just a little subtitle added on to whatever the main title of the game is. For instance, Armored Core 5 came out in March of 2012. And in September of 2013, they launched Armored Core 5 Verdict Day. So it would kind of be on theme for them to pump out another Armored Core title. Now, initially, the author of this article didn't think that Armored Core was a possibility because it had its own code name, and he said that code names were really only given to mainline titles. But Armored Core fans on Reddit were quick to point out that Fromsoftware has released these sort of spin-off titles in the past with Armored Core, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a DLC technically, which means it could have its own code name. And to his credit, he noticed that that is correct, and he did post an update on this article, basically stating the fact that it is a possibility, considering the facts of Fromsoftware's history, that this could be an Armored Core title. So that's option number one. Option number two is a little bit more interesting, in my opinion, and that is a Dark Souls 3 remaster. You see, back in November of 2024, Xbox Era's Nick Baker sort of came out on his stream and said essentially that he had information that a Dark Souls 3 remaster was in development. So if it was already in development back in 2024, it would kind of be in the advanced stages of development now, which fits with the rumors that we're hearing in this article. Also, next year, 2026, is the 10-year anniversary of Dark Souls 3. Now, Fromsoftware doesn't really have that much of a history of paying attention to those things. Anniversaries often come and go, and nothing really happens with their titles. And the 10-year mark doesn't really mean anything either. They are very sporadic with how they do their remasters. Dark Souls 1 came out in 2011, and the remaster came out in 2018. Dark Souls 2 came out in 2014, and Scholar of the First Sin came out in 2015. So they're kind of all over the place, to be honest. But I do think that the fact that we had the information coming from Nick Baker a year ago, and then we have this coming out now, does lend some credence to the Dark Souls 3 remaster theory. I personally would love a Dark Souls 3 remaster. It's not necessarily the thing I want the most, but it would be dope. And that brings me to our next option, which is, for me, the most exciting of all of them, which is Dark Souls 4. Now, I know you're probably hearing that and you're thinking I'm crazy, or you're thinking that this is just clickbait to get views and whatnot, but hear me out. I have some logic behind this, and I think there's something here that you're going to find very interesting. So the first thing that probably comes to mind when you hear that, especially if you've been following Fromsoftware very closely, is that Miyazaki has already said in past interviews that he's done with the Dark Souls series. He views Dark Souls 3 as the closure of the series, essentially. But what if I told you that's not what he actually said? This was popularized because an interpreter, way back in 2015, I believe, interpreted the original interview and left out a very key detail that changes the entire meaning of what was actually said. So in an article back in 2016 over on Kotaku, I was able to find the original quote in its entirety. Here's what it says. "For me, Dark Souls 3 is the end, but that doesn't mean the end for Dark Souls. If someone other than myself, like another staff member, wants to make a Dark Souls, then I don't want to deny others from making future installments." That's a pretty big difference right there. He said Dark Souls 3 was the end for him, as in he did not want to work on another game. But he explicitly said that he would be fine if other staff members of Fromsoftware wanted to make another Dark Souls. And we know with Elden Ring Night Reign that just launched that he's kind of handing over the reins to these kind of seasoned staff members who've been around a while. So I don't think that ruling out a Dark Souls 4 is very wise, considering the entirety of the quote. And considering the rumors that are swirling now, it might be closer than we think. Now, obviously, that could be just cope. I really, really would love a Dark Souls 4, and I know many of you watching this would as well. And I don't want you to get your hopes up too high, as in this means that it's definitely coming down the pike. But what I am saying is that it's not impossible. But there is one more option that it could be, and this might be equally as likely as the other two, and that is a brand new IP, something that isn't related to any of the games that he's made in the past. Now, we obviously would have no idea what that could be or what kind of game it would be. That is just one big question mark. But just because the same first letter of the code name is the same as Dark Souls and Armored Core doesn't mean just completely that it definitely is one of those. it could very well be just something completely new. And I'm not saying I would hate that. Honestly, I would rather have a brand new IP instead of a Dark Souls 3 remaster. I think Dark Souls 3 is still in good enough condition graphic wise and gameplay wise that it doesn't really need a remaster at this point in time. So I would much rather have either Dark Souls 4 or something brand new. But honestly, we have no idea what any of this means. All we know is that the code name is FMC and it matches kind of some of the things that have been made in the past. And the rest, we're just going to have to kind of wait and see what comes out in the future. But if we're being honest, I think we all know what it actually is. Bloodborne 2.